How did people draw maps before satellite cartography exists for thousands of years? But how did people know how entire continents and countries looked like from above? They measured things out by foot, or by boat, or just eyeballed it from a distance, e.g. sail along the coast, and doodle what you think the shore might look like from above. This was often extremely inaccurate though, which is part of why old maps look so warped and incorrect now. How did you actually measure this out accurately? The basic idea was to pick 2 points and carefully measure the distance between them. Then you spot some third point far away, and carefully measure the angles to that third point from each of your initial 2 points. Now you can back out how far away the third point is using basic trigonometry, meaning you now have a very precisely measured triangle tied to landmarks on Earth's surface. Now you just repeat this process until you get to a coast or other border, and measure the distance between points along that border as well. If you pay enough attention to detail, you can do this very precisely, but it takes forever. This is actually more or less how we do precise land surveying today, albeit with much more sophisticated equipment. One of the first extremely accurate large-scale maps was the Cassini family map of France, and it took decades to complete with multiple generations of the Cassini family working on it. Here, you can see their map with the triangles they measured. The principal triangulation of Great Britain by the Ordnance Survey was one of the earliest accurate attempts at this. They used a device called a theodolite to accurately measure angles from 2 known points. If you look at the map on Wikipedia, you can see the Salisbury base from which everything else was triangulated. It's a bold line near the south of the map. Sometimes they used natural landmarks, but often they actually built trig points on the top of hills so they'd have a consistent place to sight from different angles. I've hiked up to the one on the top of Ben Lomond many times. Early maps were done the way you and I would do it on the back of a napkin, just sketch the rough relative positions and distances. Those maps are not very accurate. Later on, they used trigonometry, which is maths that allows you to get the length of the distance to one point if you know a different distance between 2 other points, and measure the angles to the third point. You can measure your latitude with stellar observations. So, you could consistently tell how far north or south you were at any given point. So that's an advantage. You can also keep track of how many days you sailed in order to get a rough idea of how long any given coastline or sea passage was. The oldest known globe was created in 150 BCE by Crates of Malus. It has a recognizable Mediterranean, Black Sea, Europe, and the British Isles are in the right place. However, everything outside of that is ridiculously wrong and obviously speculation. As people sailed more, the general shape of Asia, Africa, and Europe became more precise. Then as naval commerce expanded for, let's say, various historical reasons, the eastern coast of the Americas became charted, then the western coast, then the interior, and finally the Pacific Ocean. Modern inventions drove progress. First, accurate clocks let you determine your longitude to a reasonable degree of accuracy. Then comes powered sailing, then flight, and finally satellites, which allow us to make maps accurate down to the meter. They use sextants, compasses, and clocks to measure their latitude and longitude against the stars, planets, and sun. This is something you can still do today in your backyard. A sextant is an instrument with a weight, protractor, and sight glass. They would look at a known point in the sky and look at the angle of the weight. This gave them an altitude, angle in relation to the horizon. Then they would use a compass to measure the azimuth. Once you had these angles, you can use math and astronomy to find your position on Earth. Latitude, north and south, relied only on these angles. For longitude, east and west, a clock was required to compensate for the rotation of the planet. If you look at old maps, their north and south measurements are nearly perfect while east and west measurements vary wildly. Some maps are super squished and some are way too wide, but the tallness of land masses were usually recorded correctly. This is because sextants and compasses have always been very accurate, but clocks and standard time were not very accurate until modern times. See for details. Basically, they used cartography, including trigonometry, with corrections for the curvature of the Earth, etc.
Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next exciting video.